Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. As Parliament convenes, a critical question facing Prime Minister Modi is how will he manage a majority in the Rajya Sabha? With the NDA nowhere near the halfway mark, its legislation could stall in the upper house. So does the Prime Minister have a rabbit up his sleeve? That's the debate in part 2. But first, the fear of censorship. After receiving a legal notice from Dinanath, Batra and the Shiksha, Bachao, Andolan, Orient Blackswan has ordered a pre-release assessment of all its forthcoming books. This follows Penguin's decision to withdraw Wendy Doniger's book, The Hindus, and Aleph's decision not to reprint a second book called On Hinduism. In each case, publishers were intimidated by fear they may have violated the Indian Penal Code. So tonight we ask, why are people suddenly finding offence with books that are sometimes over a decade old? And is this an attempt to throttle freedom of expression by creating fear of prosecution? And joining me now to discuss the shadow that's fallen on Indian publishing is publisher and writer Urvashi Butalia, writer and columnist Nilanjana Roy, the former Attorney General Soli Sorabji, Dinanath Batra's lawyer Monica Arora, and BJP spokesperson Pinky Anand. Monica Arora, after your client Dinanath Batra complained about two of Wendy Doniger's books, forcing Penguin to withdraw one and Aleph not to reprint the other, he's now complained to Orient Blackswan about Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's 10-year-old book From Plassey to Partition. Why is he suddenly finding offence with books that are so old and which have been in circulation for years and demanding they be withdrawn?
Apparently, you need to check the facts properly. It's not sudden. These things are about 10 years old. You see, we never issued a fatwa. We never indulge in violence. We never indulge in writing. What we as citizens of this country simply did was, we waged our legal, valid battle in the court of law for all these cases. We pursued these cases for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, standing before the court of law, item number 54, standing for 2 hours waiting for our turn. Simple legal battle. And when the rule of law is governing this country, what other remedy do we have? If we feel that there are insulting, derogatory, defamatory portions like an NCERT book, it says Guru Tegh Bahadur was a murderer and a rapist. I have every right to approach the court of law. It says Aurangzeb was a living saint and Shivaji was a Lutera. I have every right to go to court of law.
All right, I accept your argument.
I did not issue any fatwa against anybody.
I accept your argument that you've been contesting this for years and that you're going through the legal system.
And won when the other party was in power.
Monica Arora, you must give me short. Monica Arora, you must give me short answers. This is not a polemical discussion. This is a intelligent one, I hope. So I want others to have a chance to come in. But I accept your point. You've been fighting these cases for years and you're doing it legally through the court of law. Nilanjana Roy, in response, Penguin withdrew the book. Aleph agreed not to reprint it, and Orient Longman has ordered an assessment of all their forthcoming releases. In your eyes, is that a reasonable, understandable response, or is it A, disappointing, and B, possibly also weak-kneed?
I have 2 points to make. One is that using a bad law is perfectly legal, but it's also against the spirit of democracy. So we do have a need to look at the laws that
I'll come to that in a moment. Let's first talk about the response of the publishers.
In terms of the response from publishing, I think that there's a lot more that publishers could and should have done. Partly because they have a great deal of support among their authors, they have a great deal of support among academics, and I think among some legislators as well. They should have made an effort to fight harder and to respond to these cases by taking them through the legal system. As Ms. Arora has said, if somebody mounts a challenge, then you have a right to respond to it as well. But we are not taking into account the climate of intimidation that has existed for the last 10 years, and also the fear of the process, which is long, cumbersome, and which for small publishers particularly is a completely different matter. Penguin has the resources, smaller publishers don't.
Urvashi Butalia, you are a small publisher. Now the press has interpreted Dinanath Batra's letters as an attempt to force publishers to censor books, and therefore they believe that this is actually fundamentally an attack on freedom of expression, on the right to publish. Is that also how you as a small publisher see this?
Yes, I do see it as that. I think that it's really important in a democracy for everybody to have the right to publish responsibly, And I believe that publishers in India have been doing this for the longest time, no matter which political affiliation they have. And I find it very surprising that if you don't like what a publisher is publishing, if you find there's something wrong with it, yes, you can use a bad law, as Nilanjana says, to try and counter that, but you can also not read it. You can also find other ways of protesting about it. And there is a very, very real fear of intimidation and violence. And you cannot say that that does not exist, because time and again that has been used to silence people who are presenting a contrary point of view, and it's done by the right and the left and the center, everybody.
So, Sorabji, let me take up that key point being made both by Nilanjana Roy and Urvashi Butalia about bad laws being misused in this instance. They're talking specifically, in fact, about Section 295A of the Indian Penal Code. And this is what it says. It talks of deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class by words either written or spoken, or by signs or by visible representations. And I put it to you, that is A, so vague, and B, so all-encompassing, that it could cover practically anything. Would you accept that as a result this is a potential threat to the right to publish?
No, Karan, if you see, the section requires deliberate and malicious intention to outrage the feelings of a religious group. Proper interpretation of the section would not include criticism. Maybe the criticism is erroneous, maybe it's pungent, but that doesn't affect the law. And if that law is thought to put into motion, then they will resist it. But the problem really is, Karan, publishers, I'm afraid, without meaning any disrespect, have become spineless. Any apprehension of violence, they perceive any threat of violence against them, and they gave it. In a way, I don't blame them, because law enforcement agencies do not take action against people who violate the law, vandalize the office, vandalize the studio. They should do it. Therefore, they take the easy way out and withdraw the books.
Can I interrupt at that point? Can I interrupt that point? You began by stressing the words deliberate and malicious acts. Are you therefore suggesting that 295A will only apply when a court is convinced that the acts were deliberate and malicious, and therefore there is room for publishers to have contested the claim brought by Dinanath Batra on the grounds that these were not deliberate and malicious? They may have amounted to something that outraged feelings, but they weren't deliberate and malicious. Are you saying there was grounds there for contestation?
Yes, Karan, in the case of Ramji Lal Modi, where 295A was challenged on the ground of being unconstitutional, the Supreme Court said that any mere criticism of any religion does not amount to violation of the section. There must be these elements, and that's what the Supreme Court emphasized in order to uphold the constitutionality of the section, which otherwise would have been struck down.
Okay. Pinky Anand, you've heard what Soli Sorabji said. He's pointed out, in fact, the caveat, which is very important, that if you cannot prove that this was deliberate and malicious, therefore, then 295A won't apply. But that apart, I want to quote to you what Penguin said in the statement they released when they withdrew Wendy Doniger's book. This is what they said. We believe that the Indian Penal Code, and in particular Section 295A, will make it increasingly difficult for any Indian publisher to uphold international standards of free expression without deliberately placing itself outside the law. Given that that is a concern held by one of the biggest international publishers, Penguin, do you think the time has come for your government to amend this section, remove whatever threat it holds out, and protect creative freedom?
Karan, I don't quite think that, just because statements are made by publishers, even so as well known as Penguin, that should be a ground to say revisit. As Soli was saying, you have inbuilt safeguards in the section. If there is a challenge to what has been said, for example, as Ms. Arora was saying, the statement is that somebody is a rapist or somebody is a lutera, and there is grave objection to those kind of statements, I think it is perfectly within anybody's legitimate rights to safeguard their reputation. Freedom of speech not only includes the freedom of who's speaking, but about whom it is being spoken, because his name is possibly being defamed or denigrated or not criticized, but put in a light which is totally condemnable. So I think a person has an equal right to safeguard their or any group's reputation as much as a person who writes about it. I don't think one should really do knee-jerk to say this, that publishers didn't fight it or didn't go the process. If you follow the process of law, I am sure that you can uphold both the freedoms of people who are expressing themselves and about whom the statements are made.
We're reaching a very interesting position in our discussion today. We're coming to a point where people like Nilanjana Roy believe that in fact publishers should have contested, and we've got a point argued also by Soli Sarabji that if they had, the actual nature and wording of 295A would give them good room to contest. But before I follow that further, because that leads to the question, how weak were our publishers, I want to put this to you, Monica Arora, the point made by Urvashi Butalia. No doubt Mr. Batra was sincere in saying he was offended by the content of those books. But there are loads of books that come out that I don't like. I don't stop them being published or read. I just don't read them. If he genuinely didn't like these books, and if the Shiksha, Bachao, Andolan, Smriti didn't like them, ignore them. Why demand for them to be banned?
Again, Karan, please put your facts right. Who demanded its ban? Nobody. We never even asked the book to be withdrawn. We said, please, for God's sake, delete the objectionable passages. For example, this book on Hindus and Alternative History, what Wendy Doniger has written is, without the footnotes, without references, Gandhi and Vivekananda advised people to eat beef. Shivalanga is a representation.
Monica Arora, we don't have time for you to start quoting Wendy Doniger, because that will take up the whole show.
No, this is a misrepresentation.
Which is this. I concede that there were things in the book you didn't like. But why not simply say, I won't read the book and leave it at that? There are loads of things I don't like, I just don't read them.
You cannot put a caveat on me. I have a legal right to approach the court of law. I'm not asking for banning of a book.
Look,
I have fought this battle for 4 years. And Wendy, she never appeared in court despite service of summons. Secondly, she called the Indian courts as villains. She called the Indian laws as villains. Look at the contempt with which
all of that happened after you decided to go to court. I was questioning why go to court at all. If you don't like a book, ignore it, leave it on the shelf, unbought. But you answered my question. I want very much.
That Bhagat Singh is a terrorist. I have every right to approach the court of law.
I'm not denying your right to go to the court of law. I'm simply questioning the need to exercise that right just because you don't like a book. But if you want to exercise it, that's your prerogative. I'll come back to the two of you in a moment's time. Soli Sarabji, let me bring you in. If the publishers had contested these cases, particularly exploring that phrase, deliberate and malicious acts, do you believe, as a former Attorney General, that either the High Courts or the Supreme Court would have upheld their right to publish regardless of Mr. Batra's complaints?
Well, Karan, I haven't read the book, and I take it that there wasn't any malicious insult to any religion. What I want to emphasize is what the Supreme Court has said: criticism of any religion by itself doesn't amount to insult to religion, doesn't attack the section. And you must have criticism, because there may be two views. Was the criticism about sati?
But can I interrupt?
Was the criticism untouchability?
No, can I interrupt? One of the reasons why publishers are hesitant to go to court is because A, they're uncertain of the outcome, and B, the process is long, and C, it's expensive, and therefore they often say the easy way out is to suppress the book. Now I'm asking you, if they had gone to court, if they'd actually taken their courage in their hands, do you as a former Attorney General believe that the outcome would have been favorable to them rather than tie them up in legal processes and also cost them a fortune in the bargain?
Well, fortune in the bargain depends on which the advocates appoint to represent them, but that apart, how can I really give a definite opinion without having read the book, except to say that if the book contained criticism, maybe wrong criticism, wild criticism of a certain religion or the practices, that by itself would not attract 295A, and they would have succeeded if properly represented in the High Court or
right.
the Supreme Court.
I'll rely on that last sentence. They would have succeeded if properly represented in a High Court or a Supreme Court. Ranjana Roy, let me put this to you. Do you believe the publishers made a terrible mistake in not contesting, because this was fundamentally to do with freedom of speech and expression, and also it was a direct challenge to their livelihood?
You know, given the amount of case law that you have coming down on the side of free expression, I think it was a terrible mistake, because they had every chance of winning the case, which would have also set a precedent for the not using Section 295 in a way improperly. You know, it's a bad law. It has provision for misuse, as we've discussed. But, you know, as you've seen from what Ms. Arora said, the misinterpretation of text is a very real problem. Somebody might say with a great deal of emotion that a text is about X, Y, Z. But it, you know, her characterization of the Hindus did not bear any resemblance to the book that I read. That has to be challenged in court
eventually, and the publishers therefore were doubly wrong in not going. But let me quote to you what Penguin said at the time, and you give me your impression whether you think Penguin has an argument. They say, we also have a moral responsibility to protect our employees against threats and harassment. Would going to court have led to threats and harassment which they avoided by not doing so?
From the Shiksha Bachao Andolan, probably not, but from groups unrelated to them, I think there is a very strong case for saying that publishers have reason to be afraid. It's happened in the past.
But even despite that reason, you think it was wrong not to go to court? Because
I think they should have been open about the threats and harassment. They should have shared it with the wider community, and they should have asked the political parties responsible to take action.
Urvashi Bhattacharya, there are some people who say that what happens between a publisher and an author is a straightforward business transaction which doesn't affect third parties. And if the author has no problem to the publisher withdrawing the book, then who are we to complain? Now, do you think there's merit in that view, or is it in fact nothing but a thin cover for a way of accepting censorship through the back door?
Yeah, I think that that publishers have a moral responsibility when they choose to publish something, to publish it. If the author wishes to withdraw the book, that's another story. That is a transaction between the publisher and the author. To answer you didn't put this question to me, but as a publisher, if I may come in on it, I can absolutely 100% understand why Penguin chose to take the route that it did, because the threat of intimidation is very real, the threat of violence is very real, the responsibility to your employees is there, and also this law targets you personally, CEO, editor, author, and you can be jailed. So I can understand, not to say that I would take the same decision or I sympathize with it. I think Soli Sorabji is absolutely right. Had they fought it out, they had a very good chance of winning. And as Nilanjana says, that would have set a great precedent. That's one thing. Second, just two short points. I, as a woman, my sensibilities are offended every day by things that are published in this country. I don't go out and stop people publishing them. I counter them in intelligent ways. I want to know what that book of Megha Kumar's about sexual violence in Gujarat, which is a fact known to everybody. What is the point that Dinanath Batra wants to make by asking the publisher to withdraw that book? And what is the point that the publisher wants to make? Sexual violence in our society.
What is the point the publisher wants to make by saying they're going to, at this point, assess all forthcoming books? Because that casts doubt on those books as well.
But is this the kind of democracy we want to be in?
Absolutely.
Where the police are telling us, where these lawyers are telling us what we should read and write?
Let me take up that point about the sort of democracy we want to be in, Pinky Anand, by putting this to you. You made a cogent argument that, in fact, just because a law is being misused doesn't mean you should scrap it, because there are enough caveats within the law that a court would give a ruling that the law wasn't misused. But at the end of the day, I want to remind you of something that Prakash Javadekar, the new Information and Broadcasting Minister, said virtually the day he took over. He said not only does the government believe in freedom of press and believe that it's the essence of democracy, but he added something. He said, to make a democracy a success, we require this freedom because it gives people the choice in a rainbow of differing opinions. That rainbow of differing opinions is what Mr. Batra is trying to dismantle and damage. And this law, which can be so easily misused despite its caveats, gives him the opportunity to do
Karan,
so.
you have not read the law.
Just a moment, I'll come to you. I'll come to you.
May I
Carry
just
on.
try to address what you say? When you say this is a question of addressing a rainbow of opinion, I think this is a total misreading of the situation. If complaints have been made in respect of calling some leader a rapist or calling some leader a lutera or similar kind of aspersions which are made, I think we are jumping to conclusions to say this is a rainbow of opinion. This is not opinion, these are clear defamations and demeaning and
Pinky, you're making the mistake. You're making the mistake of limiting my question simply to the 3 instances where in fact Mr. Batra has complained. I'm not simply talking about Mr. Batra's complaint with regard to 3 specific books. I'm saying that this very section of the IPL 295A is so rich with vagueness and imprecision. It's so all-encompassing in its nature that it can be misused by those who want to. Therefore, I suggest protect that rainbow by repealing or amending this. Remove the potential for misuse.
No, Karan, it clearly says deliberately insulting.
Ladies, one at a time. Both of you can't speak together. First Pinky Anand and then I'll come to Monica Arora, I promise you. Monica Arora, let Pinky Anand answer and then I'll come to you. Go ahead, Pinky Anand.
Yes.
You know, our constitution values the freedom of speech and expression and there is no doubt about it. But ultimately under 19(1)(a), you may have reasonable restrictions for various purposes, which includes inter alia public morality, which includes the security and which includes a couple of other issues, including defamation. Now, having said that, you can't say because a law is capable of misuse. Most laws are capable of misuse. So you can't scrap all laws. You can't say in a traffic light every car should go the way they want to. If there is abuse, if there is insult, if there is denigration, if there is hurting of religious sentiments as been prescribed under these intentionally and maliciously, as Mr. Sorabji says, definitely there is an actionable situation under which you may suppress. And for example, what is being sought was not the ban of the books. What was being sought was removal of those objectionable portions.
Well,
having said that, a rule of law means that we must stand up to certain scrutiny.
Forgive me. Dinanath Batra's letter made it absolutely clear. I'm going to interrupt you. Dinanath Batra's letter made it absolutely clear that if his request or his demand to remove portions he considered objectionable was not met, he would then take action under a variety of IPL sections. 295A was one of them, 153 was another, 153A was one, 5052 was the third. So they were there. They were clear threats. But let me bring in Soni Sorabji.
Law says that
Sorry, Sorabji, I want to bring you in on
each of these sections.
Ladies, not two together, one at a time.
Each of these sections.
I know there's a great temptation when Parliament is about to convene for us to compete with them and be as loud, but that would be very uncivilized of us. Sorry, Sorabji, let me put something. Just a moment, one at a time, folks.
Please allow Sorry to speak and then allow us to speak.
Sorry, Sorabji, one quick question before I go to the others. Do you believe that 295A, given the nature of the discussion, has so much potential for misuse, A, and B, has probably been misused on other occasions, not necessarily perhaps by Mr. Batra alone, that there is here good ground for at least amending, if not repealing, this section? Answer that specifically.
Karan, any law can be misused, and the court has said, Supreme Court, then strike down the misuse, not the law, unless the law itself empowers that. That's the main thing. You can't go on repealing or amending laws or because it has been misused. Every law is capable of being misused.
Okay.
You check the misuse of the law, the abuse of the law.
All right.
And as I said, there are definite criteria in the section. The words deliberate and malicious were introduced because the select committee said it would make criticism impossible in our country.
All right.
That was a thing. That was a moving spirit.
Monica Arora, let me bring you in and widen this discussion a little, because I don't want to get stuck on interpretations of the law and I don't want to keep questioning your right to move cases. You have an absolute right to move cases. I want to put to you one of the consequences of what you're doing. Professor Waltraud Ernst has said, what is to be done when the Indian Penal Code becomes relevant to the way professional history is written? What the consequence of your actions are is this, that today you're endangering scholarship because it runs against your preconceived opinions of what history should be or how it should be written. And as a result, you'll end up deforming the writing of history. Mr. Batra has every right to his views
Karan,
and to go to court.
I cannot be part of this agenda. No, I'll tell you. Reason being, rule of law prevails in this country. As you rightly said, I have every right to go to the court of law, which I have done. Now, if you defame me, I have the criminal law available to me. But if any publisher defames me, I still have that law available with me. Let investigation take place. Let the publisher come to the court. Let the court decide. At least have faith in the court of law.
In the process, you're deforming the writing of history. You're creating a standard by which history writing is to be considered acceptable, which is non-scholastic. Are you happy to do that?
Wendy Doniger, A.K. Ramanujan, are you talking about the facts of the case?
No, Karan, actually...
Rama became father of Sita.
Okay, I've heard your point. I'm going to have to stop you there, Monica Arora. Forgive me.
No, you are not.
Actually, you're putting that question to Monica Arora is wrong. Monica Arora is a mere lawyer. She does not have a view on this.
Monica Arora, please give someone else a chance.
Monica Arora, please let me speak. I'm saying that you're putting that question to her is wrong. She is a mere... She is a lawyer. She will fight a case for anyone who pays her.
Let me explain to you why she's there, Urvashi Mutale, before you build a case actually on false stands. She's here because Dinanath Batra wasn't able to come.
Can't be. Nevertheless, if Dinanath Batra had not engaged her and I had engaged her as a publisher to fight against him for money, she would have done it.
No, I think that's a fallacious argument.
No, it's not a fallacious argument.
She has a right to represent the view without your questioning the sincerity with which she does. That's not fair.
Right. I'm not saying she doesn't have a right, and I also think
you're making this a quarrel between yourself and her, and I don't want it to reduce to that. I want to move beyond that because I think we have to get personalities out of it.
I'm not putting.
But you're getting into
personalities. It's wrong to ask a lawyer that question. That's all.
Well, no, it's not wrong to ask a lawyer question because she's here as the representative of her client. Let me broaden it. I don't want to finish very quickly.
May I finish my point, and then Nilanjana can come in. I want to say that Pinky and Mr. Sorabji are absolutely right. Laws are misused all the time, and there is no need to repeal or recall a law if only on the thing of mere misuse. But there are also civil remedies. What you're saying, when you're saying remove the objectionable passages, is like saying build a 4-story house and remove the 3rd story. How do you do it after the act? So you can have civil remedies. You don't have to apply the criminal law.
But you're forgetting something. You're forgetting something, and that was a point made by Monica Arora that her client has a right to go to court if he wishes. He may be inadvisable in your eyes, but he has a right, and therefore we can't quarrel with him using that right. What you can do is stick to your original point that the publishers have contested it. Let me broaden this briefly because we're really horribly out of time. At the end of the day, this is more, would you agree, than just a quarrel between a publisher and an author? Just more than just a dispute between someone who doesn't like it and someone who believes it should be printed. It's something that fundamentally affects our fundamental rights. It fundamentally affects our democracy. Is this raising worrying questions about what sort of democracy we're becoming?
I think we have a situation where India slipped in the World Press Freedom. We've had a slew of laws coming in that actually strike at the heart of the article that promises us freedom of expression. So the question is not Mr. Batra. Mr. Batra is happy, for example, to dictate to publishers the way certain books would be written, but would he be happy if a lot of other people had that right as well? We are living in a time where artists, writers, thinkers, and the common citizen doesn't feel that they have the freedom to express their opinions or express really what they feel. But at the end of the day, you agree with
my point that this is raising horrible questions about the sort of democracy we're becoming.
I think we have already become a very frightening democracy, and to defend it is inexcusable.
Let me put that to you very quickly, Monica Arora, because you're here representing, in fact, the man whose actions have brought these concerns to the forefront. Are you happy that for many, Mr. Batra is being perceived as someone who is drawing horrible, unwarranted and unwanted question marks around India's democracy, that he's, for all the reasons that he believes he's right, he's actually questioning freedom of expression and the right to publish. Does he want to be seen in that way?
Karan, I need time to give an uninterrupted reply, please.
You've got a minute, I'm afraid, and you have to stick to it because we'll be off air. So
thank you.
Make it short, make it sharp, but I won't interrupt you.
Does not include, let me complete. Freedom of expression does not include freedom of defamation. it feels that we are exercising our simple legal right and we are being intimidated. Not only Mr. Batra, but myself also.
On the other side.
Tell me, whom did we abuse? Whom did we go for violence? We never did so. What we did was, see, what we find wrong in the history books, we are approaching the court of law and saying, please amend them. They are without footnotes. They are without references. They are mere desires of the writer to write. Writer can have any personality. See, Macaulay had said that if you want to rule over India perpetually, estrange the Indians from the culture and civilization. That's why the history was distorted. What we request with folded hands to the Honorable Court is, please remove and undo these distortions. We are not against any publisher.
I'm going to have to cut you off.
And we are the people going to courts.
You've had a clear 1 minute. That is your answer. I'll accept it. I've run out of time. I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm going to end this particular section of tonight's episode there. It's a very sorry state we've reached, where passions are so polarized that we can't actually understand what the other is saying. And what lies at the very heart of this issue is something that should be fundamental to our democracy: the right to free speech, the right to publish, the right to dissent, the right to disagree, but still let the other speak. Voltaire put it so beautifully. I wish we Indians could become a little French sometimes. He said, I may not like what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. If only we could learn that ourselves.